Welcome to episode 277 of Apartment Hacker. This is Mike Brewer, and Apartment Hacker is my mission to tease out human potential in the multifamily space. So today I am very, very excited to bring you the very first guest on Apartment Hacker. So a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting around in my office, and Luke Mills and I were having a conversation about Apartment Hacker, about podcasts, and he said, have you ever had an interview on the Apartment Hacker show? And I said, no, but we could get started and you could be the first guest. And he graciously accepted. So Luke is an investment manager at Radco Residential. Luke also served 3 tours in the United States military for the Army. And Luke, why don't you fill in a couple of the gaps that I might have left out there?
All right, so as you mentioned, I did serve in the military. I spent a total of 5 years with the 2nd Airborne Division. I was a combat infantryman. I was airborne infantryman, so it means I jumped out of planes, did a lot of the heavy fighting stuff that happened. I had 3 tours to Iraq. During my time in the military, I was able to go to jump school, airborne school, air assault school, jump master qualified. I've got my expert infantry badge, so I've done quite a bit with the military. After the military, my goal was to get out and get an education. I went to college, and just kind of through fate and everything, I ended up at Radco. And since I've been at Radco, I've been a capital markets analyst. I've been a acquisitions analyst, senior acquisitions analyst. Transferred over in a little bit into doing dispositions and kind of investment analytics, and then kind of jumped into the investment manager role once it was created. So I've kind of seen a little bit of everything on the transactional side in the business.
Got it. So that's always fascinating to me, somebody that's spent time in the military, and I don't think anybody who hasn't been in the military cannot appreciate what one sees and what one experiences in that space. I can't even imagine it. So, but I can imagine it's very traumatic in nature. And to bring yourself back to, call it the corporate world, or just back to normal everyday life, how does, and maybe speak from your own experience, how did you re-immerse yourself into a domestic mindset versus this very traumatic, and how that kind of led you into what you just described in being an investment manager? Maybe under the premise that I've always had this heart for how do we bring veterans into the workspace, and specifically the multifamily space. How do we do that? I have a heart for it, but I don't know, maybe your path can help inspire people to do that.
Gotcha. So how I re-immersed myself. So when I got out of the military, I literally started college within 3 months. And I came back from deployment in March, got out of the military by May, and then by the beginning of August, I was in college. So I kind of just jumped right into it. But I even realized that in May, June, July, when I was out of the military, that I was looking for something to do and just needed something to do. So I really just kind of, and this will kind of be a theme as we go through here, but I've always said yes to opportunity and things like that. So, at that point in time, I'm still young. I'm about to be a college student and everything like that. So I met some friends through orientation at school, and kind of it ultimately led to meeting some people in a fraternity, joining a fraternity. That turned into just networking with other people. And ultimately, it led me to different types of study abroads and international internships and stuff like that, which helped me meet a lot of people. Which kind of, I think that's the big thing, is that there's a lot of soldiers don't want to jump back into re-immersing themselves by going out and meeting people and just being forward. So a lot of times it takes someone to actually do that themselves, or a civilian kind of, like, hey, do you want to be a part of this and stuff like that. So it's as simple as reaching out to somebody and just like, hey, we have this job. I know you were a mechanic in the military or whatever. Can you help us out, just for a little bit, kind of immerse in that way, or whatever whatever the position might be. So how I got into multifamily is actually pretty funny. I actually joined the military with the ultimate goal of spending 4 years in so I could pay for college and ultimately go to get my to become a doctor, get my MD and everything like that. I learned pretty quickly after a couple deployments I didn't want to be a doctor. And so I went back to college very open-minded, just kind of like, well, I'm just going to take as many classes as I can, every subject that I can, and just figure out what I like. So I took biology. I realized I didn't like science anymore, or I didn't have the passion for it that I did in high school. I took political science, and I realized that having come from the military, I didn't really like the politics of things, and I just wanted to have a mission and continue and drive towards that mission and not worry about how the politics affects it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally took an econ class, and it's like, oh, I like this. I like numbers, and I like kind of how things affect each other numerically and all those factors, which then led me to becoming a finance and management major. And through my fraternity, I met a professor who actually also is German, and I speak German. So we had kind of the bond through speaking German together, and then also with just through having met him through functions and stuff like that. He actually was able to introduce me to a internship program where I actually got to go to Munich, Germany for a summer and intern with a real estate company, because it was the only financial company that was available. So that being said, one of the girls that I interned with, who also worked with me, she came to Radco as an analyst, and when I was looking for a job, I was at another job interview. It wasn't a job that I wasn't that excited for. As I was leaving, I get a call from her like, hey, we have an analyst position open. Do you want to interview? And I was, yes, hell yes, let me do it.
Yeah.
And it was exciting because it was actually something in my degree field and something I had some experience with, commercial real estate. So ultimately, I think the question for, if you're a veteran watching this, say yes to opportunity. That's the main point.
Yeah.
If you're someone who wants veterans in your career field, reach out to them and give them that opportunity. Or
Sharing that perspective is, again, I'd say I really have a heart for that, and to the extent that I can help out in that world and bring veterans into the workplace, whatever that conduit might be, or providing that opportunity, I'm all in.
Yeah,
Because
good.
really admire and appreciate what people in the military do for our country on a deeper level. So I'm interested, I've worked with asset managers in the past, and now I work with investment managers, and I wonder from your perspective, what is the difference between an asset manager? Because I think many of the people in the Apartment Hacker Nation work with asset managers, not investment managers. So
Yeah.
can you talk about the difference between those two?
Yeah, so I think also, it'll depend, company to company, what the difference between an asset manager and an investment manager, or what an asset manager is. But I think typically in my career, I've seen that an asset manager is kind of the higher level person who's really just in charge of the big ticket things, making sure that, if you've got a construction budget and construction project, that they keep the construction manager on task. And then also, if you've got operational goals, you're keeping the regional manager or the property managers on task. So it's kind of pulling the strings a little bit, and kind of one of the reasons that led us to create the investment manager was that we'd seen from third parties and other groups that, asset managers and things like that weren't really taking a true analytical, investment-minded focus on the decisions they were making. They might have figured out like, well, what is the ROI versus the ROI of something else? Doing one unit renovation versus another. We do that as well, but we also kind of take into the grander scheme of things, like, besides just the ROI, how does this affect the investment? How does this ultimately, from top line revenue all the way down to net income, and actually below line as well, to our distributions, how does that affect our distributions? Will we be able to distribute to our investors more, less, or how does that all work? So investment management is just taking a more analytical approach to the decisions that we make. I think also in the past, working with third-party groups and everything like that, sometimes the asset managers can be a little detached from what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
They'll give you the goals and say, hey, achieve it, and then when you don't achieve it, they give you another goal, and they really...
With a hammer.
Yeah, with a hammer, like, you must do it this time, right? And so investment managers, working here at Radco, and working with you and the regional managers and, people within my portfolio, I try to make it a partnership, I try to figure out where do we ultimately need to be to distribute the amount of money that we need to hit the IRRs and, the cash on cash and everything like that we've promised to our investors. How do we hit those marks? And then I'll go and say, all right, this is where we're at, this is where we need to be, and then I'll brainstorm with my regionals, like, how do we get there? What can we do? And then it's my approach to kind of take every suggestion, take an analytical look at it, and then give a direction and push forward with it. So it's supposed to be more analytical and looking at the numbers and basically taking emotion and feelings out of every decision and just looking purely at, will this work for us or will this not work for us?
Got it.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. And I can tell you, just having worked with you and Laura on the investment side of the house, the times that I've really appreciated the most is when you've gone out in the field with me. I think of Oklahoma, not only that time in the car to build relationship when driving between Oklahoma and Tulsa, but actually being out on the site with you and you having a vested interest in being engaged in the process of what an operator does, and everything from walking in and looking at the presentation of the office, the curb appeal, right on through, I call it curb to commode, walking the critical path all the way down to feeling the caulk liner around the bottom of the toilet, and then you adding your analytical perspective to why all that stuff matters for the investment. So I've appreciated the partnership, and it's I remember walking into it, I was a little bit nervous, like I'm not so sure how this model works, but it's been a blessing, and I really appreciate it.
I think that's one thing that the investment managers here at Radco kind of try to do with the operational side of things is that we are looking at the big picture stuff, but as you break it down into levels of senior vice president, regional, property manager, leasing, they have their big picture things might be, how many leases do I get, or is this unit clean? Is a tenant going to come in and want to lease this unit because it's clean and we've done the unit renovation to perfection? Or it's the details that it affects my big term up 1,000-foot business plan objective. So I try to get in the field and get in the weeds and do everything I can with y'all and just try to understand what everything's going, because it's my job to kind of see those issues that you're seeing on the site level, translate that to the investment, and how can I solve that to make the investment better? Because a $1,000 miss on the site level could be, if you cap it, it could be pretty enormous for our distributions that we give to our investors. So it's my goal to try to take the two and make sure that they match the ultimate goal.
So under that, let's call that optimizing the investment. And under the theme of optimizing investment, let's talk about your best investment and maybe your worst investment. And I was thinking about this in the car on the way over. If it is better to answer that question in terms of an investment that you've made in your personal life, meaning I did XYZ to yield this thing in my profession, or if it's better to talk about the analytics of an investment here at Radco, either way, what's been your best investment, personally or professionally, and what's been your worst investment?
So I've actually struggled with this question, mostly just because I tried to get an actual example that I could provide, and it's been a little bit difficult because I don't make bad decisions, which is entirely false. I do I also make tons of bad decisions, but investment-wise, I think I'm going to change the question a little bit. Instead of worst investment decision and best investment decision, some of the things that I've learned in the past that have basically brought me to where I am. For worst investment decision, and I would say that one of the first projects I started with investment management was it was basically just it was a new property. It was an amenity center that we needed to deliver in a certain time frame, and ultimately that got pushed back because we didn't meet the deadlines that we had set for ourselves internally, and ultimately we had to push the amenity center opening back a couple months because we weren't able to get in time. We weren't able to get the permits, and it was in the middle of the summer by the time it happened. So what I gained and what I learned from that was that you can't always assume people have the same goals, have the same characteristics, and have the same motivation as you. You have to make sure that sometimes you have to motivate people differently, and you have to make sure that they stay on top of your project. And that they could have 10 projects going on, but you have to make sure that they're also that a good portion of the time is on your project as well. So that's one of the worst investment decisions I've made, is that I wasn't on top of something as much as I should have been, and ultimately we had to push this amenity center back a couple months due to just not being on top of it.
So with that in mind, what was it since we're trying to tease out some human potential here and how one might avoid making those mistakes, was there a thing that you put in place after learning that lesson of, hey, I've got to stay on top of this? Was there a tangible thing that somebody out there in the audience could put in place to avoid that kind of thing? Or that you did that
So
they could use?
the big mistake I made was, obviously was assuming everyone has the same motivation. So
Sure.
I was on the assumption that they were as motivated as I am to get things done, so that this wouldn't be an issue. So I kind of just let it go, and I check in every 2 weeks and just take them at their word. What I've done since is I have in my calendar a reminder every so many weeks whenever I'm doing a big project to, okay, they told you this would be done by this point in time. So a week before that, get with them and figure out where they are actually, and are they going to meet the goal? Are they not going to meet the goal? If they're not going to meet the goal, how can we adjust things to meet that goal? And if we have to push the goal back a little bit, why, and how far back do we actually have to push it? So it's as simple as putting a little calendar reminder on my Outlook just to make sure that I'm on top of things. And it's also it was a learning lesson. I tend when I make a mistake, I tend to get a little bit embarrassed, and I don't like getting embarrassed.
Uh-huh.
So that in and of itself was that reminds me now, like, I have a project going on, like, well, I don't want to get embarrassed, so let me stay on top of this. And I don't try to be too overly like doing the construction manager's job or the design person's job, but I want to be there and like, okay, let's walk through this.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on? Where are the deadlines? All right, we're on track. Good to go.
I like it. Yeah, things as simple as calendar reminders are very powerful tools, and I think many times people want to believe, and I'm as guilty as anybody with this, is that, oh, I've got it in here, or my wife is a perfect example. I want these 3 things from the grocery store. I come back with 2, right? Because I didn't write it down.
Exactly.
And sometimes even I write it down and I still forget to look at the list, right?
Yeah.
So, but anyway, I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit, still focused on the multifamily space. Your outlook on the multifamily investment space, since you play in that world a lot.
I think so I've been to NMHC, and I've been to a couple different conferences and stuff like that, and we read the Wall Street Journal and kind of what everyone's predictions for what's going on in the world and how things are going, and how multifamily is at its peak and it's soon going to be going down, or a lot of what we do is based on interest rates and how interest rates could be going up, or as our CEO says, that there are articles that say the interest rates might be going up or they could be going down. So it's kind of a bold prediction, but I honestly think that we're in this for the long haul. I think it's going to get a little bit tighter with more people trying to get into multifamily because we've seen the demographic shift.
Mm-hmm.
More people are renting. Millennials aren't buying. In fact, I heard from a friend of mine who is a mortgage broker that 22% of homes that were purchased last year were purchased by millennials, and of that 22%, out of 100, 2 people maybe had that money saved up. The other 98% were gifted a down payment on a home. So millennials aren't buying homes unless they have a gift down payment, and you really have the top 2% that are actually saving that money up and that can buy a home. So if they're not buying homes, what are they doing? They're obviously renting.
True.
And what is the biggest space that you can rent in is multifamily. There's single family housing you can rent, but typically millennials are renting in apartments, and you're also seeing that there are older baby boomers that are retiring and moving into apartments. There are blue collar workers that can't afford houses, so they're living in apartments. So there's this confluence of events that's leading to apartments being a major factor. Now I know we've also had interest rates rise here recently, but I think I read an article the other day, and it was on the Wall Street Journal, and it kind of rang true that we're headed for a recession because in our government, whether it's the legislative, the judicial, or the executive branch, it's in utter turmoil right now, and a country can't survive with utter turmoil for too long, and also have stock prices go soaring through the roof, which happened when Trump became president. So I think we're going to start seeing, if things don't shape up soon, there's going to be a recession, and you're going to start seeing interest rates start coming back down. I don't think, wage growth hasn't really increased much either. So
Over a long bit of time.
yeah, it's been a ridiculous amount of time that wage growth has not grown. So even though interest rates are going down, it's probably making it easier for people to buy homes. They don't have the wages to purchase it, so it's going to be in multifamily, which low interest rates are going to make it very creative for us to put high leverage debt on loans and go out and buy more. Even start developing things like that. So I think we're not so much at a peak. I think we're at a plateau, and I think we're going to be on the plateau for a while. Whether from that plateau we go to another peak or we decline, I'm not willing to speculate that far out. But I think we're a plateau right now.
Well, I appreciate you speculating as much as you did.
Yeah.
And I think that, so in that context, let's call it a fairly chaotic environment, and maybe we're playing in a space that is a little bit new, or maybe it's not new, it's just our new because we didn't live through it in years past. But what advice would you give to an up-and-coming investment manager when you entered the space, it was quite different, right? You were starting this kind of like rocket ship ride to where Radco is today, but somebody coming in today in this plateau environment, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. I think for anyone coming into this environment, it's pretty much the same advice that I would give to anybody looking to start a career in any job field. When I got out of college, I was a fraternity regional advisor for a little bit, so I would have guys from different chapters come to me and ask me for advice, and the same advice I give them is the same advice I'd give for anyone looking to get into our space in investment management. First, obviously, say yes to opportunity. Mm-hmm. You never know where things are going to take you. It might not be, if you've set your goal, you want to be this. If this is your dream, if this is your goal, this is what you want to do. This is the path to get there. There's not one defined path for everybody. There's a circuitous route to get to every dream and every goal. So say yes to opportunity, because it might start taking you on another path that'll bring you back to your goal, or it might take you to another path that, well, hey, maybe that goal wasn't really your main passion, but this over here is. And to follow that route, the next I would say is use common sense. It sounds very silly to say it, but use common sense, because there's a lot of common sense that is lacking out there. Even as far as investment decisions, well, we have a fire over here, we need to fix it, so let's pull something from we have a fire at this property is doing well, so let's pull a staff member or a resource from this property over here. Well, you've now just created a fire over at this property, and this property might get better, or it might still be a fire because it might not be the right resources. So now you have two fires versus one. So use common sense, think through things, think long term. I would also say that probably when it comes to investment-minded things, don't stretch yourself too far. Mm-hmm. It's good to push yourself, but don't stretch yourself to a point where you have a portfolio of 30 properties, but you can only handle 20. Mm. Because you're not giving it, instead of giving 20 properties its full attention and missing 10, you're probably not giving your full attention to all 30, because you'll have your problem childs that you'll focus mostly on, but then you'll have your golden boys that you won't pay attention to until it's too late.
Right.
So don't stretch yourself too thin. And then I guess the last thing is just be flexible and adaptable. I mean, there's no such thing as a static environment, and that's one thing we learned. Your environment's always moving. When I was in the military, we were training. We would always shoot static targets, but that was always to prepare us for going into an actual live situation where we would have targets pop up, move around. Your environment is never static. It's always changing. Be flexible, be adaptable to change, and don't be afraid to think outside the box to kind of figure these problems out, because static environment, working inside the box works, but in a live, living, moving environment, you can't just think inside the box and think you're going to be perfect.
True statement. True statement. I've seen that happen many times where it's a pejorative term, but to say that old school property managers might do it X way, and because they do it X way, when they get introduced with new stimulus or stimulus in a current environment, they try old school method, and it doesn't. So I love the word adapt, because you have to. You just have to. Business world changes. So okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. You've not you've not sat in a property manager's chair to run an asset, which I think is a valuable thing from my perspective. And segues to this next question. Advice that you would give to a property manager or a regional manager or even a vice president or senior vice president in an organization, because you're so far removed and you're not in the day-to-day, you're not clouded, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested, and I think the audience would be interested in what advice would you give to that cohort of operations managers?
The first one, and I've said this before, use common sense. I think I can't stress that enough. Use common sense. I've seen too many times where we'll have a problem there's an easy solution to it, but because there's embarrassment or because they don't want to get in trouble or written up, they'll do this this other plan over here that's just so many moving parts and pieces, and ultimately just messes things up even worse. Use common sense. Use use whatever works. Use it. That doesn't matter. If you get a little embarrassed, fine. That's great. You're going to learn from that. You don't want to be embarrassed again, so you're going to learn from that. I would also say that planning is invaluable, and I think I've talked to you about this. I have 3 quotes about planning. The first one is, poor planning leads to poor performance. If you don't plan, or if you're not planning, your performance isn't going to be there. You're not going to magically, Harry Potter some, great financials one month if you didn't plan it properly. The next one is actually a little bit counterintuitive to what I just said, but I'll wrap it up with a third quote. I think it was Eisenhower that said, plans are useless. Planning is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the matter is, and the third one is, I think it was Patton who said this. The greatest plans in the world get thrown out of the window when the first bullet's fired, right?
Mm-hmm.
So planning is everything, and typically, if you create a plan, you have your goal and you have your start, and then you have the plan, A through Z between, and that's great. But when the first hiccup happens, your plan just went out the window. So you need to have planned, and you need to plan. You need to plan for every contingency and what might happen. You need to know. All right, so here's points 1 through 10 to get me to my goal. I did 1 and 2, but 3 just went out the window when we had more evictions than we expected. So how do I overcome that? Your plan has now just been shot to hell. What are you going to do about it? But because you've planned for that scenario, you know what's going on. You've been planning, you've been thinking, you've been actively engaging your mind to think about the worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm. Forecasting in our business.
Yes, forecasting in our business, and a lot of that is, adapting to your environment and creating this sense of, okay, I've got this. No matter what happens, I've got this. You can throw the worst thing at me, I've got this. Which it actually leads me. We'll probably talk about this later, but one of the books and one of the podcasts that I'm going to recommend is by Jocko Willink, and his motto is good. Whenever the worst thing happens, it's good. You have 12 evictions and you only protected 2, good. How are you going to make more money off of it, right?
Yeah.
You have 10 more units now that you didn't expect that you can turn, and in our current environment, lease for a higher rate, right?
Yeah.
Good. You've got that opportunity. You have 10 HVACs go out. Good. You now need to get money to replace 10 HVACs, and thinking ahead. Well, there's 10. It's a little bit higher than normal. What other ones can I think about? So let's go ahead and plan for 20 to 30 HVACs.
Yeah.
You've now created a contingency, and you've got all your summer HVACs out of the way. You've got to think in terms like, something bad happens, good. This is an opportunity for me to overcome that, and if there's $1 million hit to your financials, good. How can I make it a $2 million plus for us?
It's a mindset.
It's a mindset. You have to. It's something I learned in the military, that you can drive through anything. You can push yourself farther than your mind can tell you, and sometimes you can make your body do things that your mind doesn't want to do.
I believe that.
Yeah. So it's all a mindset.
A scaled down version, obviously not in the military setting.
Yes, exactly. It's a very skilled. It's definitely not as crazy as in the military. So.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned podcasts, so I think that might be maybe a proper segue. I know you and I share.
Yes.
We love the podcast platform.
Yes.
To say so, and you introduced me to a couple. So, what are your favorite podcasts, and maybe segue into your favorite books and kind of what they have meant to you and added to your life that might add to the audience's life.
So, for podcasts, since we were just talking about it, I like the Jocko podcast by Jocko Willink, who wrote the book Extreme Ownership, which I'll talk about here in a second. He's a former Navy SEAL. He is, you look at him and he looks like he's just been beaten up and worn down, but he's a strong guy. He's a Navy SEAL. He's very determined, and he's built a solid business in kind of mentoring and doing leadership talks and stuff like that. The next one is the Joe Rogan Experience. This one's just more of a personal pleasure. It's one of those things where on any given day he will have a different guest, and it'll be from different parts of the world. One day you'll have a UFC fighter on. The next day you'll have astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson on.
Yeah.
One day you'll have a left-leaning politician. The next day you'll have a right-leaning politician. And then the third day you'll have someone in the middle. You kind of get this full spectrum of the entire world. And it's basically a podcast where he goes out and talks to people he finds interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes talk to people he finds interesting but completely disagree with, fundamentally on so many different levels. So he will talk to everybody, and it's good because, I think if you're, whether it's politically, whether it's personally, if you're just hearing the things you want to hear, you're in an echo chamber, and you're not truly bettering yourself. You have to hear the counterpoints. You have to hear those points that really you don't agree with, and you might never agree with, but you need to hear them because ultimately this is the great debate that's going on in our time and in our world. If you don't know what the other person's thinking or how they're going to debate you, how are you going to craft a solid debate on your end? And that's what we're seeing right now in the world, is that one side's debating one way, the other side's debating another way, and they're not crossing over. They're not exchanging ideas, and that's why we have this polarization, which got off topic, which we tend to do. But so I like Joe Rogan just because I'll be doing an analysis or something like that, and I'll throw somebody on, and it could be an actor or a UFC fighter, or somebody that just I can just listen in the background and maybe pick up a couple things here or there from. But I really enjoy that. And the last one is not so much a podcast as more or less like just a great resource, and that's any TED Talk. I think you and I were discussing it yesterday, that any problem that you might have, whether it's whether it's business related, whether it's love life related, whether it's anything you could think of, just go to YouTube, in the search terms, type TED Talk, and then what you're looking for an answer for. And if you can't find it, you probably need to optimize your search again, because there's TED Talk for everything.
There truly is.
So those are my 3 podcasts I have. As far as books, Extreme Ownership, basically the idea of Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink and Leif Babin, who are 2 Navy SEALs, is that when things go wrong or when things go bad, it's not your subordinate's fault. It's not, even if the problem is 5 layers removed from you, if you're their superior, it's your fault. You're taking extreme ownership. You told your regional manager they need to get to 95% occupancy at these 3 properties. They didn't get there. All right, that's my fault because I didn't communicate clearly that I wanted 95 at all of them. And there, it's basically taking full ownership of every failure that happens under your chain of command. It's basically, what can I do to be better? How can I communicate this better? And ultimately, it's just learning. It's teaching you how to speak to your subordinates or the people underneath you or even above you. What's the best way to communicate? Because no one communicates the same way. Everyone, one regional might like to be peppy. The other one just wants to tell you the facts, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you tell the facts to the one that's peppy, the message is going to get lost in transmission. So, extreme ownership is about communicate the way that your subordinates are and take ownership for the failures of your communication. And it's ultimately one of those things. It's also a great team building thing, because if your CEO goes to your region like, well, why haven't you hit 95? I know that was your goal. And then you step in and is like, well, actually, that's my fault. I take full responsibility of it. I didn't clearly communicate what we wanted, what was the goal, what was what was the long term, what was the mission. We didn't communicate that properly. You'll also get like, okay, well, this guy just stuck his neck out for me, and I know it was my fault, or I know it was something that I could have done. You open up them to be more open and honest and caring with you, and just, okay, well, actually, I could have done this, but I didn't because of this. And then you start working through and you start exchanging ideas. Well, how can we make it better next time? It's all about those exchanging of ideas.
Absolutely, a little bit of collaboration.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
I like that. 2 other books did you have? Or
I actually have a couple more. So the next one is Tools of Titan by Tim Ferriss.
Love Tim. Yeah.
I know you're a big fan of it. I like that book just because he really just goes into how different people do different things. And ultimately, I think entrepreneurship is, taking one thing that works in one sector with another and solving a problem that works in another sector, right? Mm-hmm. That's entrepreneurship. And I like reading about how different people do different things because, I can take what works for a Navy SEAL and take what works for Bill Gates, combine them together and solve a problem that I have.
Right.
So it's a good kind of book. The last 2 that I have are actually kind of more personal, introspective kind of building. And the first one's called You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. And it's basically a book that says where you are today in life is because of what you've done. You are a badass in that. You survived, 30 years or however long you've been alive. You are a badass at this point in time. You're doing something that someone else can't be doing right now, so you're a badass. And it's just kind of to get your mental, it's basically a hype book. You're supposed to hype yourself up, like, okay, I can do this. I can achieve this goal. I can go talk to this girl. I can do this. I can do that. X, Y, and Z, right? The next 2 are The World Beyond Your Head, Becoming an Individual in the Age of Distraction, and Real Happiness, The Power of Meditation. And those two are books that I purchased recently and I've read a couple times, but I think they're ultimately ideals that I've always known. The World Beyond Your Head is kind of a lot of people, in our society with depression and everything like that, people live inside their heads and get caught up in, like, they're bound in chains by their mind. Mm-hmm. And you have control over your own mind. So you're putting yourself in chains, it's limiting yourself on what you can do. Meditation's one way to get over that, just to realize that this negative thought that I have, it's just a negative thought. It can go away. It doesn't matter. Yeah. It's not going to affect how you approach a situation. It's not going to affect your day. The World Beyond Your Head, Becoming an Individual in Age of Distraction, is very focused on kind of the same thing, but also we live on these things.
Oh, yeah.
We have a million distractions. How do you get beyond that? And one of the things that I've learned from it, and from other books, is that every night when I get home from work, I plug this thing up and I put it in a drawer and I don't look at it the rest of the night. There are some nights I do look at it, I won't lie, but I won't look at it the rest of the night because there's work emails that come in. Then I might get on Twitter and I might see something I don't agree with and I just get kind of upset. And you're doing all these things, plus the lights are really bad on those things. So
right.
You're doing all these things right before you get ready for bed, and your sleep is going to be affected by it. And we all know sleep is important. It's
Sure.
If your body doesn't have a chance to rest, if your mind doesn't have a chance to rest, you're working in overtime all the time, right? So I try to get rid of that, and that's basically what that book's about. Meditation is just kind of let those thoughts out of your mind. There's negative thoughts like, I can't do this, I can't do this. Yes, you can do that. I can prove to you that you can do that. You just got to get rid of that, no, I can't do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So those are the books that I would recommend.
I appreciate that. I read a lot of books myself. Some of those I've not read. I've read 2 of those and not the other 2, but I always I think books are sort of catalysts for incredible actions that you can take in your life, and you do need to take time, in my opinion, to read, but more importantly, you can't get caught up in too much reading. I think one of the implicit things you're saying there is you have to act.
Yes.
You have to act. Take that information and employ it in your life.
Yeah.
And like getting out of your head, you have to physically act in what you're doing.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the things I've been really successful at, is that I'm very analytical, but I'm also I can be very engaging with people, and knowing the times when I need to be engaging and when I need to be analytical, and kind of finding that perfect medium in between.
Sweet spot, yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. Okay, I want to switch gears and I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions. You didn't get
Okay.
to see these before.
All right, let's go.
You saw the other ones.
Let's do this.
So we're going to do rapid fire questions and then we'll end. We'll do a little bit of an acknowledgement thing and then I'll do an ask. The
Okay.
ask being an ask that you might have of the audience or something that you want to. So here's the rapid fire questions. Your favorite superhero and why?
Ooh, favorite superhero and why? That's a great question. I've always been a fan of Captain America and Superman.
Okay.
However, in recent months, I've liked Deadpool.
Oh,
Just because of the movie. I think he has that laissez-faire attitude and kind of don't give a bleep. I'm a fan of that. That's how I liked. I prefer to be kind of on the cusp of things like in that kind of regard. So I'd go with that.
Okay, understood. Awesome. Favorite summer activity? We're headed into summer. What is your favorite thing to do in the summer?
I've done a lot of it lately, and I actually did it yesterday. Going to the baseball game and just watching a game, just enjoying having a beer, sitting with friends, talking, just while watching it, watching a sporting event.
Excellent. So alive or dead, who in this world do you admire most and why?
Who do I admire most and why? Theodore Roosevelt. I think he is my idyllic portrayal of what a man should be. I may not agree with what his politics were, but he was, speak softly, carry a big stick. I feel exactly like, I don't need to be yelling at you all the time, but I need to be able to, if I need to carry a big stick, I'll carry a big stick.
Excellent. Your favorite, most recently learned vocabulary word, giving you a place to use that.
I wonder where this came from. So I learned yesterday the word fat doodle, which is basically someone who brings nothing to the conversation or brings nothing to the table. So there are a lot of fat doodles out there in the world that I wish I could hear less of.
Thank you. Thought I'd provide that for you. Coffee or tea?
Great question. It depends. Right now, I'm a tea guy. I'm green tea.
Nice.
Right now.
I like green tea. Define happy.
Define happy. For me, happiness is not a care in the world. As anything or anybody or whatever that can put you into a state of mind where the weight of the world, the weight of your job, those aren't existent because you're with this person or you're doing this thing. Happy is not necessarily, I don't want to call it an escape, but happy is an activity or something that you can do that takes you to that next level where you don't worry about those other things.
Excellent. If your Facebook profile was connected to every single user on Facebook and you knew that they were going to read something that you could post, you have complete license to post whatever you want, what would that thing be that you would say to everyone?
On Facebook, stop posting dumb stuff. I actually gave up Facebook because, I have my views on things, and I have friends who have different opposing views, and I would just tell them to stop posting stupid things because there are a lot of things out there that just make no sense, and just stop it. Stop it.
I think you've got-
Actually, if I'm being honest, I would tell them to stop worrying about the little things. It's not going to matter 50, 60 years from now, 20 years from now, 5 years from now, is it going to matter? Don't
Yeah.
worry about those little things. Don't post a status about it. It's not going to matter.
Yeah.
You're going to look back on it when oh, you said this 5 years ago, and you're like, wait, why did I say that? Or, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. Don't worry about those little things.
Yeah, you take a huge burden off your mind.
Yes.
Kind of what you were speaking about earlier when you do that. Well, before we wrap up here, I wanted to take just a little second out here to acknowledge you for a few things, if you
Okay.
don't mind. And I've not known you a very long bit of time, but long enough, I think, to start to develop some, call it opinions, for lack of a better way to put it. But I want to acknowledge you first for your character. I look at you in your age, you're fairly young. I feel like I'm escalating in the years, but I really admire your character and the time that I've spent with you, honesty, integrity, and things of that nature. I really, it's quite admirable. And I imagine your upbringing in military and has really put that. I like your flair because, paying attention to your, the few Facebook posts that you do, the few Instagram posts that you do, there is flair in there that I think is fun.
Yeah.
I think when you're engaging with regional managers and vice presidents and out in the field, you have a flair about you. You share memes as they're germane to whatever goals we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
And I think it's very cool that you do that. Your wit and your wisdom is awesome. I really appreciate that. I think you have a grit about you that is, it's sort of a subtle grit, right? It's not a hammer grit. You may say the word hammer, but you're not a hammer as a Jocko would be, at least not my perspective of it, but you still have that grit that gets you from that A to B no matter what piece of stimulus disrupts your initial plan. And I appreciate that about you. And then I think finally, I grew up in a military town, and for the longest time I had no appreciation for the military. In fact, I looked at them like arrogant a-holes. And I had an experience happen to me in a Sears store. I was selling a lawn tractor. I think I told you the story. And this guy, we got involved in a conversation, and I shared my disdain for the military. He's buying a lawn tractor for me. He comes up to the cash wrap. I say, I need to see your ID with your credit card. He whips out his military ID, and obviously I feel this tall, and the guy says to me, look, I can appreciate where you're coming from, but let me ask you a question. If you're thinking about a person that's going to defend your country, would you rather have an arrogant a-hole or a daisy? I said, point taken. So I say all that to say this. I really appreciate your service to our country and the capacity that you spent time over in Iraq and defending the freedoms that we have. So,
it was a fun part of my journey, so it's a part that I still take with me, but thank you. I appreciate that.
yeah, very, very cool. So my last question for you is, what is your favorite property management company in America?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's not really tough. It's Radco Residential.
Nice.
I've worked not exclusively with them. I've worked with other property management companies, but Radco Residential brings that extra something that I've seen lacking a lot of other property companies. And I'm extremely biased. I'll be the first to admit that, but I've enjoyed working with Radco.
Excellent. Do you have an ask for our audience or anything that you would leave them with?
What kind of ask are we talking about?
Any ask.
Interesting. I guess kind of to go back to one of the first points that we made at the beginning with veterans and opportunity, my ask is, how can you provide an opportunity to a veteran? Or not even a veteran, someone that just needs an opportunity. Or someone that has a goal. How can you provide them an opportunity to achieve those things? How can we provide opportunity to someone?
Very good.
Yeah.
Awesome. Luke, I appreciate this time. I appreciate two things: the catalyst to try this as something else on the Apartment Hacker, and being the first guest.
Well, I'm glad to be guest number one, so
Absolutely.
I'm in the record books.
Excellent. Woo.
Yep.
Yeah, and hopefully, like episode 1000 of interviews will bring you back on, if there is such a thing. Anyway,
I expect to be back on 100 and 1000. So.
Nice. Okay.
All right.
Excellent. Well, really appreciate your time today. Let us know if you like this. I can line up other guests to come on and have Luke back at some point if you like it. If you don't like it, say that too. That's okay. We like both views of the world. So take care. We'll talk to you again soon.